tonight, we now know why President Trump has been so anxious over the last week when it comes to Robert Mueller, even going so far as to one point tweeting that his attorney general should end the Russia investigation. According to sources close to the White House, the president is scared for his son, Don Jr. He's scared about what Mueller may have on him. The president has been hosting a rally in Ohio tonight, and that's where we find CNN White House correspondent Boris Sanchez. Boris, has the president even mentioned Mueller at this rally, and why is he so concerned about his son now?
Hey there, Anna. No mention of the special counsel Robert Mueller or of Russia. The president not repeating that line we hear from him so often, no collusion. Still, the speech is going on, so he may go in that direction as I'm talking to you. But multiple sources close to the White House indicate that President Trump is worried that the Russia probe may get closer and closer to his family members, namely his son, Donald Trump Jr., and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, both of whom were in that June 2016 meeting in Trump Tower. Of course, Trump Jr. helped orchestrate that meeting with Russians that were promising dirt on Hillary Clinton. This all comes to a head as we're seeing much more expressive attacks from the president against the special counsel on Twitter. Just this week, he demanded that his attorney general, Jeff Sessions, end the Russia investigation, despite the fact that Sessions recused himself from that. Sources close to the White House say that as the president has seen the coverage of the special counsel's investigation, he's become more agitated, and that has led to these attacks. We should point out the president has denied having any knowledge of that meeting at Trump Tower, though sources close to Michael Cohen, his former attorney, say that the president not only knew of that meeting, but also approved it. Now, the White House has not returned our request for comment on this story. They actually referred us to the White House legal team. They have declined to comment. Anna?
All right, Boris Sanchez, keep us posted on those comments he's making tonight at the rally. In the meantime, let's discuss with CNN legal analyst Paul Callan, CNN political contributor and former mayor of Philadelphia, Michael Nutter, and CNN political commentator and former Trump advisor, Steve Cortez. Paul, I'm reminded of the column you wrote last week about Don Jr. possibly being in trouble and how he could prove to be President Trump's Achilles heel.
Yes, I said that he was the Achilles heel in this case because if Don Jr. testified before Congress under oath, or even if he gave statements to congressional investigators, lying about whether the president knew about the Trump Tower meeting with the Russians, that would be perjury. And that could subject him to a possible jail sentence if convicted on that charge. So that's a very, very dangerous thing if that happens to be true.
And if that happens to be true, you went so far as to say that Robert Mueller may be able to try to work some kind of a deal with the president.
Well, yes. I mean, this is somewhat speculative, obviously. But if the president was of a mind that a lot of his relatives were going to get arrested, I mean, it could be Don Jr. Jared Kushner could have a problem. He was at the Trump Tower meeting as well. It might put pressure on the president, much as pressure was on Richard Nixon to resign the presidency. So this kind of prosecutorial aggressive stance against the president can sometimes terminate in a resignation.
And that obviously would be huge, and that's a few steps down the road. But Steve, I know you were an advisor to Trump during the campaign. Several people have said they don't see Trump Jr. not running to his dad and telling him about that Trump Tower meeting. Do you have concerns?
You know, I really don't. I mean, first of all, the president has been emphatic on this. Don Jr. has not just been emphatic, but as Paul mentioned, has been under oath. So I think they've taken this very seriously in their denials. And what do we have on the other side? You know, what spurs this hypothetical? It's just the word of Michael Cohen. And Michael Cohen, I think, quite frankly, has besmirched his own reputation by really acting reprehensibly, by taping his own client, something which is at least unethical and perhaps could even lead to disbarment, secretly taping his own client, secretly taping other people, including colleagues of ours at CNN. So I don't think his word matters much, in this regard. And as far as the
but it's
the
not
probability
just Michael
or plausibility,
Cohen who has hinted that Trump has not been totally forthcoming, or that Don Jr. hasn't been entirely truthful either, because we've heard from Anthony Scaramucci, we've heard from Steve Bannon, who've also hinted at the fact they believe Trump probably knew at least very shortly after that meeting, not a year later when the New York Times initially broke the story.
I have to say this. It's not implausible to me, as somebody who was deeply involved in the campaign, that in June of 2016, when we were in the throes of trying to make sure that we secured the nomination, I mean, we had already won the primaries, but there was a lot of talk that there was going to be a convention fight against Donald Trump, that effectively the Republican establishment was going to try to steal the election away from Trump. That is all we were focused on. And the pace of the Trump campaign the entire time was nothing short of just frenetic. So the idea that they would pass on telling the president, the then candidate, about a very quick, meaningless 20-minute meeting where they got no valuable information, that actually makes sense to me.
Michael, Trump is a father. Is it odd for him to be concerned about his kids? I mean, just because you're a politician doesn't mean you stop caring about your kids, right?
Of course he cares about his kids, and Steve's explanation is just, it literally is laughable. Apparently they weren't all focused on securing the nomination because the president's son, his son-in-law, and one of his top advisors, Steve Bannon, went to a meeting with Russians, and they knew that they were going to that meeting, and it is
Steve Bannon
beyond any I'm sorry?
Steve Bannon was not there. That's not true.
Bannon was not at the meeting, but Jared Kushner was,
Bannon was not.
as well as
he certainly
Paul
knew about
Manafort,
it. The first two were there, and Paul Manafort. I'm sorry,
That's right.
You're on that one. You're right. Paul Manafort, who is now under investigation. So it is completely implausible that he did not tell his father, in my mind at least, before the meeting and certainly after the meeting, that this was taking place. This is the same young man who talked about money pouring in from Russia back in 2008. This is also the same person who conspired with his father to issue a wrong statement, factually incorrect statement, on Air Force One about the same meeting. So, yeah, it seems like he's got some problems.
And they have admitted that he did, in fact, dictate that initial misleading statement. But, Paul, earlier this week, the president was tweeting that Attorney General Jeff Sessions should end the Mueller probe. Now, the White House says he was just offering an opinion. It wasn't actually a directive. But now that we know he may have been worried about his son, does that tweet amount to obstruction of justice?
I think it's something, obviously, that Mueller will be looking at as a potential obstruction, not an obstruction in and of itself, but as part of a whole package of actions that the president has taken to try to impede the Mueller investigation. And I think now we know, knowing what we know now about Don Jr.'s actions and the president worrying about this, we start to understand why the president has been acting so bizarrely during the last week. You know, there was a tweet storm that's kind of almost unprecedented from him during the past few days, all about the Mueller probe and threatening to fire Mueller, while his own attorneys are out saying, well, we're negotiating the president possibly giving a statement to Mueller. So he seems to be on a totally different track from his attorneys and very worried, and it feels like he's worried about a family member.
I mean, to that point, we look at how much he's starting to tweet, how he's attacking Mueller himself. The Washington Post saying he's tweeted the phrase witch hunt a combined 46 times in June and July. That was up from 29 times in April and May. And more, of course, he's calling out Mueller by name. Steve, if the president's son is in trouble with Mueller, how far do you think he would go to protect him?
Look, I don't want to engage in these hypotheticals. To my knowledge, Don Jr. hasn't done anything illegal. I think it was silly, by the way, for him to take that meeting. That was a mistake. Does it rise to the level of criminality? It sure doesn't seem that way to me, but I'm not a criminal defense attorney, so we'll see. I think, though, regarding the president, he clearly has been ratcheting up the rhetoric and the pace of his arguments against what's going on with the Russian probe. And I think the reason he has, though, isn't that he believes his son is in trouble. I believe the real reason is this probe, because they were able to come up with nothing connecting Trump himself, not other people, Donald Trump, to Russia. Instead, where the Mueller probe is headed, at least according to New York Times, according to some FBI sources, it's headed toward making a case for obstruction largely from public sources, from speeches and from tweets that the president put out. Now, I think that has the president justifiably incredibly angry if we are going to try to criminalize the public political speech of a president of the United States. That tells me that this is only about creating a narrative to impeach the president. It's not actually about justice. It's not about criminal law.
But why do you say that when you look at what Mueller has done? And in fact, we've been covering the Mueller investigation, and he has brought forward charges against 30 individuals and or entities. We have multiple people who've pleaded guilty. There are multiple indictments involving people who were part of his campaign, including the trial of Paul Manafort. Right now, he was the campaign chairman at one point.
Right. Anna, look, you make a good point there, but the vast majority of those indictments are against non-Americans, first of all. And within the Americans, the vast majority of the charges have nothing at all to do with the Trump campaign. They're things that Paul Manafort did 10, 12 years ago before he had any relationship to Trump, before Trump was a politician. So, yes, there have been a lot of indictments, a lot of charges made, but nothing still that's remotely connected to the president doing something improper with any foreign people.
And Mayor Nutter, I know you have some thoughts on this.
Right. Well, first of all, the Americans that have been charged are pretty important and significant people. The second thing is, Steve, you can try to spin it as much as you want like a top. The Mueller probe is nowhere near over at the moment. You cannot say that nothing has been proved against the president because nothing has been said or charges brought forward with regard to the president. So, I mean, you're running around in a no-person zone with that kind of information. Obviously, the president is clearly becoming unhinged. His head is about to explode. The closer and closer this probe comes, he knows that Manafort is in trouble. He knows Flynn is already in trouble. He knows that Michael Cohen is in trouble, and the many other investigations that are going on. This is all crashing in on him, and he flips out when he has a little extra time on the weekends, attacking. I mean, unfortunately, it's become the norm that he goes on these tweet storms over the course of the weekend when God only knows what he's doing because he's doing pretty much the same thing during the course of the week. It does make you wonder, actually, what does he do other than tweet and go to rallies? How much work is actually getting done? And he's got a lot of probes around him. And, when they're at your kids, that will cause a little bit of anxiety, I would think.